What's up, Internet, and welcome back to the Owl's Nest, where we cover everything Overwatch that's going on with the Houston Outlaws. Now, for you new faces here, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button and hitting the bell to make sure you get notifications every time we're going live. And of course, hit that thumbs up button if you're liking what we're doing here. Now, this week was a bit tough for the Outlaws, ZP. We had Philly and we had New York, and we fell to both of them. But it's okay, right? Because even though you're losing, we have a lot that we can learn and we can get stronger from it. So what can we learn from the Philly match?
Well, first of all, I mean, Philly match did start out pretty good, right? Where it was 2-0. It just ended horribly with a reverse sweep, which is kind of one of those dreaded terms in Overwatch. You're like, oh, reverse sweep. People get hyped over it. Obviously, it's epic for the team that pulls it off. But from when you're on the receiving end, you can still take solace in the idea that, hey, you did win the first two maps. You were on the verge of taking the series. Just, you get to examine, why did things go wrong?
Yeah, absolutely, right? We started with a good dominant Volskaya win, and then we followed up with that Bastion hijinks on Nepal. But I think that's the big question, is where did it go wrong? And I guess let's first start talking about Hollywood, right?
Right, and Hollywood, of course, is one of the new maps in Stage 2, was not played in Stage 1, and I think Hollywood is going to be fairly difficult for the Outlaws moving forward. First of all, Junkrat, while good on the opening point A for Hollywood, not so great on point B, and Junkrat has historically been a very big strength for the Outlaws so far in OWL. Also, the second point of Hollywood is one of the least tank-dominated maps in the game, where because it's so wide open, your tanks can't really control the flow of battle the way they could on a more closed-in map, or really just the average map in Overwatch as a whole. So given the fact that the Outlaws rely so heavily on the dominance of Muma and Coolmat to set up fights in most scenarios, it's not going to be a strong map for them, and I think it's going to take them multiple iterations to kind of adapt and get to a point where they can feel comfortable in Hollywood. So the fact that Philly was able to come in here and get Hollywood to their favor doesn't really surprise me if you actually looked at the strengths of the Outlaws coming into this.
Okay, and then when it came to Route 66, what happened there?
Route 66, I feel like that was just a compositional matchup error, where we came in with a slower push setup where we actually did use Mercy without a Pharah, which does happen in this meta, just rare. And the idea was to be more slow, methodical moving in. The problem is that we went up against a quasi 3 support composition coming in from Philly, where they ran 2 supports and a Sombra, which meant that they were completely okay with us taking a slower approach. In fact, it worked out really well for them because we ended up giving them more time to charge EMPs. Shadowburn, who you normally wouldn't even see on a Sombra historically, was able to flex to it very well in this instance. And I just think it's a case where running the Mercy against that double support Sombra composition was not great for us, and it definitely didn't do us any favors, and as a result, Route 66 did not work out well for us. We were held at first.
And lastly, we fell at Ilios, right?
Yes. Ilios was more back and forth. I'd say the thing that really hurt us more than anything else was how Ruins went down, where on the Ruins stage, normally we can count on Linkser to do really well in Widow v Widow duels, but Shadowburn really flexes versatility in this case, where Shadowburn was able to force Linkser off the Widowmaker first. And even though Houston was able to come back within that round, just too much progress had been lost from the early setup where Philly was able to take first control, where Linkser was outdueled, and there was enough buffer there for Philly to take that round. And then you move into the deciding round, which is on Well, right? And the Outlaws were one fight away from actually taking that. I think it was just a case where they misjudged a little bit at the very end. They were overextended, given the fact that Boombox had to run him with his Transcendence no matter what. They took the fight in a situation which wasn't really ideal. And the end result of all that was that Philly was able to get a good final fight. The Outlaws did lose, but it was on a razor's edge at the very end. So it very easily could have went the other way, but credit where credit is due. Philly did play very well towards the latter half of the series.
Now, I do want to start talking a little bit, though, about New York. Now, for that, we actually got 4-0'd, which, yes, we've seen those before, but I feel like there's a little bit more to this particular match, right?
Oh, absolutely. 4-0 is one of those things where you look at the score sheet where maybe you didn't catch the match at the beginning and you go, oh, we got 4-0'd, we got destroyed. And it wasn't quite as simple as that, except for Volskaya, where the Outlaws completely got destroyed, right? Where the Outlaws tried to go in again with this sort of slower composition with McCree, and New York just kind of looked at that and says, we're going to hard dive your McCree every time you try and go through. And it took about 2 minutes in on first point until the Outlaws actually swapped up, and just too much time had gone by. And frankly, New York was playing on a higher mechanical level in that first map. So Volskaya, not really close.
But then we swapped over to Lijiang, correct?
We went to Lijiang, yeah, and it was kind of a mixed bag for the Outlaws here, where they were able to kind of stick to their bread and butter on Control Center, where is one of the stages where you can still very easily use a Junkrat. Jake was in prime form for that, and they were able to strike back early in Control Center. The problem is that they were caught off guard a bit by the far play moving into Garden, where you had Libero go Farah and do really well, and then you go to Night Market, and again, they're just kind of mechanically outplayed. It felt like the Outlaws were a little bit sluggish to start off the series as a whole.
Now, though, when you look over at Kings Row, though, that seemed like it was more of a complete slugfest when we look at that map, right?
Kings Row was exciting. I don't care who you root for, whether you root for the Outlaws, you root for the XL, whether you root for the Mayhem and somehow you haven't been broken of that compulsion yet. No matter who you rooted for in Overwatch, Kings Row was great. It was an overtime game on both ends. Both teams had long pushes deep in. I mean, it was 5-6 was the final score of that. So no matter what, it was good Overwatch. It was still interesting, though, because I think the part where the Outlaws kind of failed a bit there was on their defense, where they didn't run Jake on Junkrat. Normally, you would expect them to run them here. Instead, they ran Jake on Tracer for defense, and they ran him on Roadhog for offense.
Yeah.
And I think the Outlaws' defense is fairly reliant on the sort of gameplay flow you get when you have a Junkrat tire that buy you time, etc., particularly on maps like that. So overall, the Outlaws' defense was a bit weaker than what we've been accustomed to. The offense, though, was exciting, where Jake was able to make the Roadhog work really well, and they got into a flow even without having tires going in. They were unsettled a bit on their defense by dealing with Libero's Farah on first, but it was just interesting to see the change-ups come. And I think a general theme for me with Jake is that clearly his most consistent hero has been Junkrat, and that's been really good. I think it's just going to be a learning process for him to a degree, where he's always had some consistency issues on his off heroes, but Hog actually looked very promising here. So even though it came down to the wire and New York was able to finish out in the end, Kings Row was not something to feel bad about as a fan, where it was still a very good game and very easily could have went either way.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun to watch, but then we transitioned over to Route 66, correct?
Yes, we moved over to Route 66, and the funny thing about Route 66 is, again, this one is closer than it kind of gives credit for, where the Outlaws were one fight away on defense from taking the map. There was about like 30 seconds left on first, and were they able to have taken that fight, they would have won the map, of course, by that time the series was over, so it wouldn't have been contesting the series, but it could have gone the other way. So, unfortunately for them, of course, after they lost first, it kind of got rolled over directly on second, but overall, I mean, I think the Outlaws just aren't comfortable right now on Route 66 and Hollywood in particular. I think it's going to take a little bit of time. And I do think they kind of have to start future-proofing themselves into a way where you can sub in Jake, have him be good on heroes other than Junkrat. But again, if we look back at Stage 1, there was kind of a learning period for the Outlaws at Stage 1 as they got comfortable on maps, as Taiwan was able to solidify strategies. Probably going to get more of the same here in Stage 2. If they can repeat what they did in Stage 1.
Now, speaking of Stage 1, there's one team that we had not had a chance to play yet, which is the LA Valiant. Now, we're going into next week. We get a chance to play them, and we get a chance to play Florida Mayhem. So I'm looking forward to both of those matches. Do you have any thoughts for what's going into the Valiant?
Going into Valiant is going to be very interesting because narratively, Houston coming into Stage 2 was, okay, Houston, you are a top 3 team. Now it's sort of, would you like to continue proving that you are a top 5 team? And Valiant has sort of been that team in the middle that has been the gatekeepers, right? Where if you go against Valiant here and lose, that actually lowers the stock of Houston by league perception rather heavily, right? Because now not only have you lost to New York in a 4-0, even if it was close, not only have you lost to Fusion again, but you've dropped now to Valiant, which means that you can't be considered a top 3 dominant team. So there's a lot at stake there, particularly for Houston. I think for Valiant, if they lose, it's not the end of the world for them in terms of perception, but sort of, okay, you're not top yet. But there's a lot to lose in regards to that matchup. Then you move to Mayhem, and I think it's safe to say that Houston is very favored in that matchup.
Yeah.
But if they were to drop to Mayhem, that would be a disaster, right? That's actually, that's when you suddenly start getting the narratives. What has gone wrong with this team? Where have the wheels fallen off the cart? Is it because Jake can no longer rip a tire? I mean, who knows? That's not a good scenario to go to, but on paper, going against Mayhem, Mayhem has certainly been struggling. Stage 2 has not really alleviated those struggles a lot, so in theory, it should be an easier match for the Outlaws.
And it definitely feels like it's going to be a week that you guys don't want to miss when you're tuning into all of the Overwatch League matches. Now, if you guys are still enjoying this stuff, make sure you're subscribing, hitting that bell so you know exactly when we're going live, and hit us with that thumbs up.
They actually beat us if we don't sell out like that, so please. If you don't want us to be bruised and broken, follow this man's advice.
Yes, please do. We'll see you guys next week.